Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience while we finished up a few things in executive session. I'm sorry that we kept you waiting. It's nice to see some community members and others in the audience tonight. And I'd like someone to make a motion to return to public session. Rory, motion by Rory, seconded by Ilana. All those in favor?
Aye.
6-0. Great. And before we can begin, can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Thanks.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so tonight is Thursday, January 25th. And this evening, we're going to have a couple of presentations. One will be a presentation by Marianne Van Doon from our internal auditor. Thank you for being here tonight. And she will be providing us with a report on the internal audit, which was previously reviewed by our audit committee. And then we're also going to have a presentation from our Assistant Superintendent, Alex Casabona. And we're going to have a busy night. And then we do have a discussion on the agenda regarding Shady Lane and Lewisboro Elementary School. So can we begin with any board announcements? I just wanted to say that Marjorie and I were both on a conference with the Westchester Putnam School Board Association about board communication. So it was interesting. There were some interesting ideas, and I think we'll maybe schedule a board development to have a conversation about some different ways that boards are communicating in the district. But we were very aligned with most of them. So
that was one Monday night.
Yeah,
I signed up for it and then something happened. It'd be interesting to hear more about that.
Great. Andrew, do you have some announcements?
I do. Starting with some congratulations. I want to congratulate 3 John Jay High School students who won awards last Saturday at the Westchester Rockland Junior Science and Humanities Symposium at Yorktown High School. The first is Shina Carr, who's sitting here with us tonight. Congratulations, Shina. Shina at the symposium won first place in genetics and neurology and will advance to Albany for the upstate Junior Science and Humanities Symposium with a chance to move on to the nationals from there. So really congratulations, Shina. It's an amazing accomplishment. And then she was joined in the same competition by Chloe Jaffe, who won 5th place in Earth and Environmental Science and is an alternate for the Albany Symposium, and Kiara McGorry, who won 2nd place in the local division of Biology and Medicine. So amazing accomplishments. Congratulations to our students and to their teachers who've supported them throughout the research journey. So congratulations to all. One more time. And then further congratulations to John Jay Middle School's first Lego League robotics team. Our Wolves team were the tournament champions of the Hudson Valley Regional Qualifier held in Mamaroneck on Saturday. They competed in a field of 18 teams and were one of 6 teams to advance to the Hudson Valley Regional Championship at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute on February 10th, where they will compete against 23 teams from across New York State. We've been hearing about the success of robotics from the high school for a number of years, and now we're hearing about it from the middle school too, which is just fantastic. So congratulations to that team too. Mm-hmm. And then just some quick musical announcements upcoming. We have a concert here at the high school on January 31st, the high school jazz concert with the band and the wind ensemble. And then our elementary schools have their concerts coming up in February. Those concerts feature the band, orchestra, and chorus. February 1st is at KES, February 6th is at Increase Miller, and February 7th at Meadow Pond. So good musical events to look forward to. And then finally, just a reminder, we've had some weather events recently. Superintendent's up early in the mornings discussing what to do with school. And as a result of 2 closings fairly recently, now both March 28th and April 8th are regular school days for students and staff. We do still have 2 weather reserve days remaining in the calendar, so we'll see what the rest of the winter brings. That's all I have.
And Andrew made a significant announcement that's not part of tonight's announcements, but We will have an item on the consent agenda tonight, item 12.05, and I will probably pull that out to say a few words regarding Andrew's resignation for retirement. I wasn't sure whether you were going to mention it again.
wasn't
in
gonna
your
mention
announcement. So, great. So, as I said earlier, our first presentation this evening is from our internal auditor. So thank you so much for being here. And if Lisa, you'd like to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
course.
We're really happy to be your new internal auditors. This is our first year with the district. And we were really happy with Lisa and her team. They really gave us the information we needed. It was a great dialogue. And I really thought, the internal audit went very smoothly. This year, we did issue reports, 3 reports. We did the initial risk assessment. We did a IT audit, and I wanted to thank your IT team. I see they're in the audience. They were very helpful also in getting us the information to get our IT cycle report done. And we did what we call a risk assessment update. So every year, just to give you an idea, we're required to do a risk assessment update, and then we determine an in-depth cycle that we want to review. So with the initial risk assessment, the audit committee, we met with the audit committee and they wanted us to look at the IT cycle. The report was a very good report. We did have a couple of recommendations, which we did discuss in the audit committee with regards to policies and permissions. And I know the district is very proactive in addressing the recommendations. So it wasn't anything that, significant, but however, it was some recommendations that came out of the report. So all in all, a very good report. I got great feedback from my team with you guys saying that you really were a solid team and they knew what they were doing. So which was very comforting for us. So that was really the first cycle that we did. So we do have that in-depth cycle done. And then we did the risk assessment update, like I said, for this year. So what we do is every year we reevaluate the risk. We do a lot of interviewing, we do testing, we review all your board policies, your procedures. And then based on that updated risk assessment, we do recommend an additional cycle to do. So we decided with the audit committee, we will be doing your special services, which is your stacking for your special education program. So we will be looking at that in the spring to do an in-depth review. And that's a great cycle because that really, generates revenue for the district. So we're going to be looking at the forms that are filed with the state to make sure that you're capturing all the state aid that you should be getting. So I thought that was an excellent choice that the district wanted us to look at. So we will be back before you know it. I know you feel like we've been here a lot, but we will probably be back here in like March or April to do that in-depth cycle. But all in all, the reports, we had some, like I said, some recommendations and, they were all good, easy recommendations that are going to be implemented, I know, shortly. And I know the corrective action plans were in place. And the district is already, on board with doing whatever recommendations we gave them. So, which is comforting. We go to a district, they want to improve, and that's the sense we got, when we went in to do the audit. But all in all, I think your internal controls are very strong. However, we always like to recommend additional things for you to consider. So that really was what was in the report. But great reports. Both reports were great. And, thank you, Lisa, for your team, and tell your team that, they were very helpful and we were able to get everything done so timely.
Thank
So
you.
I don't know if anybody has any specific questions. I know we went in depth we had a nice long meeting. It was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I feel this is like my hometown now. So we did go into depth with the draft reports.
Yeah. So just for clarification, the audit committee does do a much longer review of the internal audit and goes through it, really in detail and asks
Right.
questions and follow up. And we have community members who are part of that audit committee. So we appreciate all the community members who are willing to volunteer and be a part of that. So what we see tonight is really just sort of an abbreviated confirmation that the audit happened.
Right.
But you can also ask questions. I'm not going to say. Great. I don't think there are questions.
No
Thank you so much,
questions?
Marion. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, good to see you.
Good. Great. So that brings us to item 7.02, which is a presentation on response to intervention. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you to our IT department for being here. And Alex, if you want to take it away, go right ahead.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. So we'll get started. This is really an update on the progress that RTI, that the district has had with our response to intervention program. So it's a look back over the last 10 years. So if we look at the first slide, I just kind of want to define what the goals are for tonight. So we really want to just give you guys a history and a definition of what RTI is. We want to look at how this program has been implemented at KLSD. Then we're going to focus on the current practices, how we identify students, what kinds of interventions we offer them, and what kind of data we have to look at. Then the last piece will be kind of highlighting recent and proposed changes to the current plan, as well as sharing the plan that we propose that would be adopted for this year. Okay, so I wanted to begin with a thank you to the following KLSD staff that couldn't be here today, but without the work of these individuals, this presentation would not be possible. So I wanted to really thank Maureen Jones and Anne-Marie Pesavento, who are part of our technology department. And they really did a tremendous job in digging through and looking for archived materials and really helping the RTI committee kind of use the data in a way that was meaningful. And when you're looking back at 10 years worth of data, it's a lot to consider. The next group of people are Jillian Abish, Patricia Ford, and Amy Signori, who are interventionists in each of our elementary buildings, who really contributed to reviewing the data, looking back historically at how the program had changed and how we evolved to the current program that we have today. You'll see our building administrators next. So we have our elementary principals, our middle school administrators, and Marissa Merlino, our director of guidance. We're standing members of our ICI committee and really at the building level ensure that the process is working. And then all of our other RTI committee members who have dedicated, we meet regularly. Last year, we met about once a month. We've been meeting once a month this year at a minimum to really ensure that we are creating a plan that's consistent across all our schools. So advance the slide and you'll see here, this is our district-wide RTI committee and it's comprised of. So it's not necessarily just our interventionists that do the work, but we have gen ed teachers, we have some related service providers, some of our building administrators, as well as some district level administrators that are part of the committee. You'll see here, these are our interventionists at the elementary schools, at the middle school, and you'll notice at the high school slide, these teachers are not dedicated solely to AIS, which is what we call our model at the high school, academic intervention services, but these teachers may work 0.5 or 0.2, so a fraction of their day is dedicated to supporting students in this model. So what is response to intervention? Why are we doing this presentation? If we take a look at this slide, I wanted to give everybody just a little background, and RTI, the spirit of RTI really came to be out of changes to the IDEA. So that is like the law of the land as it comes to special education. And every so often it's reauthorized. And in the 2004 reauthorization, one of the things that they asked states to do was to consider this concept of RTI or tiered intervention and the purpose of it was to support students that were being classified as having learning disability to ensure that those students were having access to interventions. Because at that time, not just in New York State, but across many states, we were seeing really high numbers of classified students. That, as I shared, it really asked us to look at whether districts were offering students research-based interventions and if we were considering the students' response to those interventions. So that is where the process of RTI began. So when you look at RTI specifically in New York State, even though IDEA is reauthorized every so often, sometimes it takes the states a little while to catch up. But in 2012, districts were required to have RTI plans, specifically to help determine if students in grades K through 4 had disabilities in the area of reading. Typically, when a student is diagnosed with a learning disability, that tends to be the area with which they struggle most. RTI plans were then incorporated. In our district, we had an AIS model. So this really became a place where RTI and AIS began to merge. And over time, you might hear colleagues in other districts refer to RTI as MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support. If anybody has any questions, feel free to. All right, so these are the components of an RTI plan. So, you know, you have to have a multi-level framework, a systemic approach, early identification and prevention, a universal screener, multiple tiers of intervention, monitoring of student progress, a decision-making progress as to what students need support and what students don't, as well as parent involvement, meaning that they're speaking to their teachers, they're understanding the supports that are being offered to their children. And then the key is consistency of implementation, that we're really looking at our cycles of support with a lens of consistency. Okay, so in practice, what does this mean here? It means that we're benchmarking students 3 times a year using a universal screener. At the building levels, our data teams then look at that information from those universal screeners, along with some other assessments that our teachers use. And they look at the data, and that's how it's determined what students are eligible for intervention. You'll see that there's a 3-tier process. So some students may have more classroom-wide support. Tier 1, Tier 2 means that they may be pulled out with the interventionist. And then Tier 3 is a more regular. So they're seeing that interventionist several times a week. And then the final part of the process is that we have this district-wide committee that really periodically checks in and looks at how the programs are being implemented. If we look at this image, this is what the tiered model of intervention, really the ideal model, should look like. So if you see at the bottom, that's Tier 1. The majority of your students should fall into this tier. So these are students that may need some preventative support, proactive strategies, and that is not just in academics, it can be social emotional supports as well. Then you have your Tier 2 group. So that's tends to be a very small percentage as well. And those are students that are considered to be at risk. And so you're targeting the interventions and tracking their progress. And then you have that much smaller percentage depicted in red here at the top. And those are the students that you're giving those intensive interventions to, your progress monitoring, and you're really hoping to support those students prior to any consideration of potentially them being classified and needing, you know, more restrictive supports.
Can I just ask a quick question just
Sure.
on this, just for clarification, because I know the future slides rely on this. This is of those students who have been recommended for intervention, right? The 80 to 90%, 5 to 10%, 1 to 5%. It's not of the total body of students. It's only of those that have been recommended for intervention.
So in
Is that right?
reality, a Tier 1 plan can be started by a classroom teacher at any point. So classroom teachers don't necessarily need to wait until we do the benchmarking at those 3 points in the year.
Gotcha.
They can at any point through classroom assessments, their own judgment, talk to their building level committee and say, I have this student, I'd like to start a Tier 1 plan. They can get input from the interventionist, but that classroom teacher is really the one delivering the Tier 1 intervention.
And those students stay in the class. There's no
Yes.
change in their
Right.
daily routine at all. But
Right.
they have been identified. So somewhere we've logged the fact that that student is now, I'm not sure what the word that we used was, recommended for intervention.
So yeah, so the teacher has made the building aware
Gotcha.
that they're creating this Tier 1 plan. They'll talk to the rest of the building level committee about maybe progress monitoring. They can ask the interventionist, for example, if it's, you know, they feel the student needs extra support in math, they can always ask the interventionist for strategies or tools. But those Tier 1 interventions are something that the classroom teachers are delivering to their students.
But I think to your question still, like this these are the 3 tiers within students who have been recommended for
Identified.
intervention.
Not
But the tier
No.
1
No.
could be
So-
much broader in
Yeah.
scope.
So tier one is really
Ev-
everyone, right? So in theory, you could have a class of first graders and you might have 7 or 8 students that have tier one plans. As a teacher, you
So
might
are
have,
so, okay, that's interesting. So if I look at this chart, then we're saying that if I look at the yellow section on the chart, that between 5 and 10% of all students require either academic or behavioral intervention. Is that accurate? Of all
Well-
students, not just of those identified, but of all students?
right, and this,
Okay,
you
that's
know, this is a model that's used nationwide. So in some communities, your numbers are really going to meet those thresholds. In some communities, they're not. But typically, you don't want to see a building where you have a very large number of students that are in that intensive tier. Then that begs the question of your instructional approach and, you know, is it really a tier one problem? Where you want to support your classroom teachers in using, you know, diverse practices that maybe capture and support more learners.
that makes sense. Thanks. Thanks for the help there. Judy. That's good clarification. Thank you. So it's all students represented.
Yes. Okay, so so these are the benchmarking tools that are currently used here at Katona Lewisboro. So a universal screener means it's got national norms attached to it. So these are assessments that are not necessarily specific to the curriculum that we are using, but they're normed for students in that grade across the United States. And Ames Web Plus does happen to be standards aligned. So if you wanted to look at those results of those assessments compared to your standards in your state, you can certainly do that. Our elementary teams use the Ames Web Plus, and that's given K through 8 for ELA and math. And the IXL diagnostic is used by the math department at the high school, as well as our interventionist in the middle school. It's their second tool that they use when they feel that students may need some support. The next slide talks a little bit about the curricular assessments or the assessments that we use as supplements or just as another data point. You always want to triangulate the data. So we don't want to just go off of one universal screener that a child took one time. So if we have a child that takes their Ames Web assessment and doesn't perform on par with their peers, these are the things that then we would consider. So you'll see listed in ELA, these are the different assessments that are used at the elementary level and in math in terms of supplementing that picture of how is the student really performing.
Alex, may I just ask, are there comparable tools for assessing behavior when I think about the right-hand side of the pyramid?
So that's a great question and something that's really debated, not just within our own clinicians, this idea of do we want to have social emotional screeners? And I think we currently do not use a social emotional screener. They are available. You'll see as part of our plan, our psychologists and social workers have really come up with a tiered approach as to how they would flag students that might require some more social emotional support, whether those are, you know, maybe behavior plans specific to behaviors that the child is displaying, whether it's, you know, that they're starting to show symptoms of depression or anything else concerning. So we do have our own internal measure that we use that teachers can use to bring students forward.
Thank you.
So these are in terms of the secondary assessments for ELA and math. So these are the tools that our secondary teachers are using as their second data point. So they'll give their Ames Web assessment and then they'll look at these other tools again to kind of really look at the students holistically and determine who needs support and who doesn't. Okay, so now we're moving along to the actual tools. Once a student has been flagged as needing some support, these are the tools that are available at the elementary level. So it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Our interventionists are trained in different programs. So we really have the ability to have the interventionist cater the tool to the student need. So you'll see here, we have varied tools for working on reading and a number of tools for working on math at the elementary level. If we look at the secondary interventions, you'll see what's available to address any needs that students might have or remediation needs in the area of ELA, and as well as in the area of math. And in terms of math, it becomes a little more challenging because at the secondary level, all of the math courses really are independent. They don't always necessarily build on each other. So because you struggle in algebra may not mean you're going to struggle in geometry. So you'll see that it really speaks to some more curriculum aligned interventions that can be provided to students. So here's what our data crunching got us to. It was very difficult to try to find the actual number of students over 10 years. And that's because you might have a student that received multiple interventions in 1 year, and then maybe one intervention the next year. You might have some students that received interventions for grades like 3, 4, 5, and 6. So we really then decided that maybe looking at the total cases of intervention provided was probably a more accurate way to look at the data and to count. So as expected, you'll see that predominantly interventions were provided at the elementary level, then, you know, a little less at the middle school level, and then the least number of interventions at the high school level.
And just to be clear, by counting it as cases, there are more cases than students in some cases, not to say. So in some instances, one student might be represented as a 3 on here because they were a case perhaps in the middle school and also in the elementary school. Is that correct?
Right.
And can we just take a quick look at this chart?
Sure.
So am I reading this right if I say that for elementary, we have 2,000 students who are in the top 2 parts of that triangle, and only 299 who are in the bottom, who require no intervention, I'd imagine? Is that, am I looking at that right?
So it's students that actually had tier 1 plans that were flagged by the assessments. So a student can have a tier 1 plan because the classroom teacher has chosen to bring that student forward, but on the actual assessments, the student may score average and not be flagged for needing support. It doesn't negate the classroom teacher seeing different things and determining that she feels the student needs a tier 1 intervention plan.
But are we saying that 80% of our elementary student, oh no, what am I?
This is 10 years of data. So this is over 10 years.
Yeah.
There were 2,047 cases of tier 2 and tier 3 intervention. So if you say it's 200 cases per year, that could be.
So it's challenging, Rory, because we
120
couldn't
students.
narrow it down to student. So we just
I
looked
understand
at
that.
interventions that were offered. So we looked at the plans that were developed.
I try to tie my 2 questions together. So originally on the triangle, we had 80% in the green section at the bottom of the triangle. And I asked, are those students who have been recommended for intervention? And you said, no, those are all students. They're all categorized in tier 1, all students. Now I look at this and I see that only 299 elementary school students were in tier 1. And I think the definition of tier 1 is different here than it was on the triangle, because the triangle included all students. And I threw my pen away. And now this 299 is only those tier 1. It's all students, but we're only counting the ones that have been recommended for intervention.
Right. So that's a great question and a great distinction. The data that we used for this was our RTIM Direct. So these were students that actually had an RTI tier 1 plan that was being progress monitored. And when a classroom teacher develops the plan, the understanding is that she or he would be the one keeping the data in their, classroom, and then determining, when the next benchmarking cycle came, if the benchmarking then matched the need, then our interventionists would maybe step in and provide some of that. But these were students that actually had tier 1 plans, which, for example, at the kindergarten level, our interventionists sometimes push into the classroom to support the classroom teacher and may work with a small group. And that wouldn't necessarily be considered a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention, because the interventionist may be modeling for the teacher. They may be giving the teacher ideas on how to group the students or what types of materials to have available to support students.
It could be that's enough that they are then graduated out by the time the next assessment comes through.
Right. And on the
That
next
they don't need that
assessment,
tier 1, they just needed that little extra
right, like
Yeah.
extra support.
boost.
Alex,
Yes.
the large decrease from elementary to middle school to high school. Is that because the kids are either being put into general ed or then they go into IEPs or 504s, and that's why you see this huge decrease?
Yeah, so typically, if you have a student that's received elementary intervention and they're still not showing progress, those students tend to be the students who become classified. So we see less students at middle school needing RTI support because those students tend to already now be maybe receiving special class reading or integrated co-teaching. So those students are supported through special education versus by the interventionist.
Because there's much more resource dedicated to the elementary school than there is to the middle school and high
Yes.
school.
Yes, and I think that, early intervention is important. That's where you're really going to getting our interventionists using those evidence-based programs at a very young age is really going to support students in developing those skills that they need.
I just also would point out that the middle school only has 3 grades and the elementary school has 6
Okay.
grades.
Mhm.
So as a percentage of the overall student body, it's actually kind of hard to tell whether a higher percentage of elementary students are receiving RTI than middle school. So I'm kind of unclear on that. But with respect to the tier 1 versus the tier 2, 3 delivery, is it what you would expect that the middle school is offering more tier 1 as a percentage of the overall amount of RTI that's being offered than the elementary school? When I think about the population of students in elementary school and the pyramid we looked at a couple of slides ago, it is a little counterintuitive to me that as a percentage of the overall amount of RTI, twice as much of the middle school's RTI is level 1, but maybe it's because of what you just said, which is that students who have been experiencing or participating in RTI in the elementary school, when they exit the elementary school, perhaps they're classified, they have a 504. So the middle school is offering tier 1 to some population of students, but doesn't have as much need for students to go on to tier 2 and tier 3. Is that about what you would expect is really what I'm trying to ask?
Yes, and
That matters more than what I would expect.
Yes, I think that the structure of a middle school is also very different. So you have different teachers, right, for every subject. There are a lot of literacy-based components, but for example, in 6th grade, your teachers are really talking to each other about your literacy skills. So if your ELA teacher sees that you're really benefiting from having a graphic organizer that's laid out a certain way, that'll be shared with your team so that same graphic organizer can now be offered to you in science and in social studies. So when there's more writing, you're still going to have that tool available.
Okay.
I think it's also just a function of students have either developed skills to compensate by then, or we've captured them and we've diagnosed them with a disability and now they're receiving special education supports.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So this was a little more straightforward, and what we used was attendance data for this. So these were in the 22-23 school year, these were actually the students that were scheduled for receiving intervention services. So you'll see at our elementary level, we had 421 students receiving support. And again, of that 421, some may have been receiving reading, some may have been receiving math, some may have been receiving both. Some may have had building level speech or, just a number of interventions. At the middle school, we had 66 unique students. And at the high school, there were 42 students that received RTI supports.
So Alex, just on that slide, so I was looking, the first thing I looked for here was sort of a trend over the 10 years to see if our overall RTI is sort of going up or going down or it's remaining the same. And I didn't see it, and I understand some of the reasoning why we don't have that. But if we see then that there's 530 cases in the current school year, and I looked and tried to total, it's about 4,000 in over 10 years. So it feels to me like it is trending upward. Do you have any sense of whether our support, our RTI support is static over year to year, or is it?
So I think we're just
Which
doing a
one?
better job tracking who we're servicing.
Okay.
One of, and I'll talk about this a little bit later in the look back over 10 years, was a transition from the tools that we're using to capture the plans, to look at the data for students. And in taking a look back, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we'll talk about what we found in terms of the data and where we're hoping to go with that piece.
If we for all 10 years, if we had been doing everything the way we do it today, the data might be slightly different. So there's an
Exactly.
anomaly. I get you. Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, so so this will be a nice segue, but we picked cohorts at the elementary level at random. So they do represent different elementary buildings. But we wanted to share with you guys how our students fare on assessments that are comparing them with national norms. So you'll see, for example, this first grade cohort, at the beginning of the year, you had about 26 students that fell into that tier 3 bucket when they took their assessments. You have about 7 students that fell into tier 2, and then 36 that were flagged as tier 1. And you'll see as the progression, as we move into the spring, how those numbers have changed. And what it really speaks to, it's that the majority of our students, especially if you look at those who fell, in that red area, those students were really, really well supported, because then you end the year with, rather than 26, you end the year with 6 students still needing that intensive level of support. Similarly, if we look at the third grade cohort.
Can I just ask on that? Is that because they've been classified, or is that because the RTI was successful and they've just gone back to mainstream?
Yes, so there, if I'll go back to that slide. So conceivably in this first grade cohort, the fall benchmarking typically it happens anytime in September to October. So those students would be flagged, and that group that's in the red, right, our tier 3 students, they would begin receiving a pull-out intervention. And that the frequency of that intervention might be anywhere from 4 times a week to 5 times a week, targeted in that area, whether it's ELA or math. So what the graph, what the pyramids depict is that by the end of the year, because of that level of intervention, we had a lot less students falling into that high risk.
So the reds maybe move to the yellows in the winter, and then the yellows move into the
Right.
greens in the spring. But is it also possible that if a student is classified in that time period, that they would also move off of this chart, right? They would now be classified and they're no longer RTI.
Well, that's a great question. We actually still have our special ed students take the assessments. So there are times, depending on the cohort in each building, in each grade, if there are a higher number of classified students that are really needy, let's say, for example, if we have a special class reading, those students may continually stay in the red, even though they're getting the intervention they need, just because their percentile score compared to their peers remains, right, deficient.
Okay.
So they're just not making the progress as quickly.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
So then we will shift over to this third grade cohort. And you'll see that in this case, and again, the cohorts, because it's all in 22, 23, those first graders are not in any way, connected to these third graders, and these third graders are not in any way connected to the fifth graders. So you'll see that this third grade cohort really began the year very strong. There were very few students that fell into tier 3. There were actually only 2 at the fall benchmarking. At the winter benchmarking, there was only 1 student. And then by the time we got to the spring, it went back to 2 students. And so I also want to caveat this with, we don't only go by the Ames Web benchmarking. So if those other assessments that I showed earlier, let's say some of the TC assessments or the advancing literacy assessments that the teachers are using show that there is a gap, that the student is maybe not moving along in reading levels as quickly as the teacher would like. Those count as points as well. So we use a tiered system of points and we allocate a certain number of points to Ames Web, but then the teachers also allocate a certain number of points to those classroom assessments. So there might be a student who doesn't necessarily, who maybe falls into moderate risk based on the Ames Web, but if the other classroom assessments speak to the student needing some support, they'll be picked up by the interventionist. You know, the committee also gives leeway at times if an administrator is aware, let's say, of some extenuating circumstances, maybe, you know, a family that's been through some traumatic experience where perhaps they know that the child is showing a small gap, but because of the circumstances, without some extra support, the gap may grow. Building administrators also have that flexibility to add some of those students into an RTI group and provide them that targeted support. And then the last cohort, so we picked a 5th grade cohort, and you'll see the same. So what this tells us is that, you know, as we get higher in the grades, we tend to have more and more students that are secure, or, you know, that on national norms are performing on par with their peers nationally. And that the percentage of students that are in that tier 3 or tier 2 are much smaller. And for this particular cohort, by the time they took the spring assessment, there were no scores that placed students into that tier 3 level.
But just to go back to what you said in the other slide, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no students receiving tier 3.
Right.
So this is just the Ames Web data. So this is the score on Ames Web.
Right.
One data piece that we're looking at and how our students did on that one data piece.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so this next slide, with the data we had, and we used both our RTIM Direct as well as IEP Direct to try to cross-reference. So of the students that had been receiving support over those 10 years, we had about 180 students that were then found eligible for a 504 plan, so formal accommodations, and we had 307 students that were found eligible for an IEP, meaning that the committee determines that even with intervention, they weren't making significant enough progress and that they were eligible to receive special education services.
Alex, on that, so there's 487 students there over the course of 10 years. But I think we provide IEPs and 504s to a larger number than that. So that's not the only path by which students get classified with IEPs or 504s, right?
Right. So in terms of our disability categories, you may have a student with a vision impairment, a student with a hearing impairment, you know, students with intellectual disabilities who we wouldn't be using this tiered model.
So they wouldn't be included in these numbers.
Right. So
And what about the students that are preschool classified? When they come in, they would skip this RTI and go right into special ed, so they wouldn't be reflected in those numbers as well?
So those students would still take the assessment.
Okay.
And I think it varies, and that's probably why you see in that kindergarten cohort, that's where you saw the biggest number of students that were falling into that tier 3. Again, just on that one data point of the Ames Web. But because they didn't have those foundational skills, they may not be coming in, right? Not all kindergarten students go to preschool. And as Lorraine said, you know, some students are coming in, having had the experience of being in a special ed preschool and continuing to be eligible. So in terms of the plan and the look back, this slide compares for you some of the changes. I'm sorry. So this slide compares for you some of the changes. The district had a plan that was put together and presented in the fall of 2013. And then there was a revision in 2015 to that plan. And that was a 15-18 plan. And then there was the 19-20 plan. So that 19-20 plan changed the assessments that had been in the previous plan, and they began to use more curricular-based assessments. So in our original plan, there was the DRA, the maze, there were multiple assessments, but they were really still more nationally normed assessments that teachers weren't using in their everyday practice. In the 1920 plan, that changed, and we began to look at more of those curriculum-based assessments that teachers really were using in their classroom all the time. The district developed a point structure to allot points to quantify student performance on those varied assessments. In the revision of the plan that was attached that we've shared, you'll see that we incorporate even more curricular assessments, particularly across the elementary level. You'll see the use of formative assessment tools like that forefront math interview. So it may not necessarily be tied to curriculum, but it's really about skills for math. And the teachers can use it to look at where students are over time. We have some revised social, emotional, and speech guidelines that are proposed and included. We are proposing some updates to the language to be more inclusive. So, for example, the state no longer uses the term mental retardation, it's intellectual disability. We no longer use emotionally disturbed or emotional disturbance, it's emotional disability. So those are some of the changes that we hope to make as well, to use language that's more inclusive. And most notably, the structure at the high school went from a tiered three-tier model to more of an AIS model. And the reason for that being that at the high school, students may periodically need support that's more curriculum-based versus a deficit in math or a deficit in reading. And going to an AIS model really allowed us to target students that were maybe struggling in a particular unit of ELA or on several assessments, and they could come into AIS, receive targeted support in their area of need, and then once they started performing on those classroom assessments, no longer need to access that support. So in terms of the next steps, some of the things that the committee would like to do is, after doing this in-depth look back over the 10 years and really having our technology department try to pull all the information together in a way that we could look at it comparatively in a way that would even make sense, we determined that it would be really important for us to have a summer committee to review progress for every year and then propose any changes that might be needed, so that we really needed to have a committee that would consider progress across all the schools and then determine, did we have any changes based on that data that we needed to make. We're recommending that we really work on having an annual adoption of the plan so that we can keep current and so that we can really make that decision being informed on data looked at that year. We felt that that would be a much more accurate way. The committee tried really hard to compile 10 years of data. And I think, I don't think it was a flaw in the district. I think the tools that we have available for capturing student data are just so much more sophisticated over the last 10 years that there's just a lot more available to us right now that would give us information in ways that would be more meaningful. The committee would like to consider the removal of the point system. And that really speaks to the judgment of our teachers. So our teachers are using assessment day in, day out, but there seems to be a lot of pressure around the benchmarking points. And we certainly don't want benchmarking to feel as a task or chore that's not informing their instruction. We want benchmarking to be something that is not only useful to identifying students that need to be picked up by the interventionist, but that our classroom teams feel like, oh, great, I got this other information on my kids. I'm going to be able to do X, Y, Z tomorrow, to get my instruction to match their needs a little bit better. We want to make sure that we have an ongoing review of the assessment tools that we're using within the classroom. And really would like to look at our screeners and see, would we have recommendations for any additional, so for example, Ames Web Plus offers a couple of other assessments that we don't necessarily use. So we would like to look at the impact of what would happen if we had our students sit for a few more of the assessments that Ames Web offers, and then we'd have an even broader picture of their skills. So those are some things that the committee's planning to do in this year. And then as far as the future of the committee, we would like to institute a district-wide data day. So right now the building teams meet and they have their own data days, and the principals meet and have each teacher come, and each teacher really does look at how their class performs. So that's something that the principals have been doing consistently, pretty much for the last 10 years. What we haven't had an opportunity to do is really look at how are we doing K-5 across one building, or how are we doing, K-5 across all 3 elementaries. So how's our first grade doing across the district? How's our second grade doing? So we really would like to institute this district-wide data day where every building would bring its data for the year. And then that could be looked at across cohorts by grade. And then that is that cohort tracking initiative, so that we could really identify, and we feel that this would not only be beneficial to the students in those cohorts, but perhaps to the staff, because it would give us a sense of, for example, if we saw big gaps in second grade, specifically in math, then that would help us to understand, well, maybe we need to get some math PD or some additional supports in this particular grade to support, again, not just our students, but the staff working with them. So at this point, if anybody has any further questions, that's my report.
It was a great report. Thank you. I have one question about the point system.
Yes.
So I think it could be a good thing. I just don't understand exactly how it works. So I know that you've got, the Ames web, and then there's other things that you consider. Is there potential that, like, if you're on a point system and a child's like on a bubble, say they need to have an 80 and they're at a 79 to be considered, I'm assuming that if the teacher really feels that the child needs to be receiving services, that they could. But I just want to make sure that we're not moving into a too subjective system. The points, at least you're able to look at each child and see where their numbers are. By removing the point system, would it be going to a too subjective
That's a
standard?
great question, Lorraine. And actually, we wouldn't necessarily be removing that tiered system, right? So that we would be gathering different data and allotting that. What are the feedback we've gotten from our teachers and the interventionists and our staff developers is that the points were created by us. So for example, for one of the phonics assessments, we determined that if a student scores 6 or less, that's worth 3 points. If the student gets 10, between 10 and 6, it's worth 4 points. So when thinking about it statistically, we kind of have arbitrarily assigned points to these assessments that really weren't meant to be used in that fashion. But we did it because in trends, right? If you have I don't know, if there's 26 letters that children have to identify, and we're saying if a child can only identify 5, they get 3 points. If a child can identify only 10, they get 2 points. It is somewhat arbitrary, but the spirit of it is to identify those students that are performing less well on their classroom assessments. So the idea is maybe to not assign points arbitrarily to those curricular assessments, but to maybe assign points to teacher input, the screener, and classroom performance overall on the assessments, rather than saying, maybe a teacher has students that all her students can identify up to 15 letters. So that teacher may feel that a student that only identifies 12 is a student that needs a little extra support, where that may not be the case in another classroom. And we really want to give teachers that opportunity to make the case for their students if they are seeing that within their classroom, that one child is needing some more targeted support.
Thank you.
Just in thinking about the interventionists and our staff, do you see or do you have conversations around whether the experiences of the interventionists then inform classroom instruction more generally, based on what interventionists are seeing from the students with whom they're working? Is there then a mechanism where conversations occur to think about how to shift classroom practice more generally? And also, can you provide any like a differentiated lens into the math versus the ELA in terms of the extent to which anecdotally, more often than not, tier one is all kids need, or whether more often than not, in this one subject area, more kids are, ending up in tier two and tier three. Like, is there any characterization of the math as compared to the ELA that you can share with us to help us sort of see what's happening with our kids and who's in RTI and for how long and that kind of thing?
It tends to be more students receiving ELA interventions than math. I think in terms of, I want to give an example. So at one of our elementary buildings, they have like tier one Tuesdays. So the interventionists are available and classroom teachers can make their appointment and come during that time and bring data on a particular student and talk through questions they might have. From that, it might stem that there'll be a visit from one of the interventionists to coach the teacher maybe on how to use small groups effectively, or, what manipulative materials might be more useful to teach a certain topic. So to answer your question, yes, our interventionists do support classroom teachers a lot, and they do model, as well as our staff developers. So both Selena and Allison offer coaching cycles to teachers that they can sign up for independently. So if there's something that a teacher may identify as wanting support in or wanting to learn a new particular strategy, we do have that availability that either our staff developers can support them with a coaching cycle, or our actual building interventionists can push in and dedicate some time within that classroom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for pulling this together. I know that when we think about data and technology and changes that happen so quickly, that I think it's interesting to think about what things look like 10 years ago versus today. And I'm optimistic that the specificity and the efficiency of the data can help us to continue to improve what we're doing for our students. So thank you very much for pulling this together and continuing to work with our special services to work on RTI. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we are moving on. I don't know what number the next thing. The discussion is 7.03. So this was something that I suggested we put on the agenda at our last board meeting. And I really just want to introduce an idea. We currently in the district have 2 properties that no students are using. So Lewisboro Elementary School and Shady Lane. And I think that we have been fortunate in the last few years to have relatively healthy revenue coming in, but we know that there's some shifts in revenue, and I think we need to think about sharpening pencils, et cetera, when we have those kind of dialogues during the budget cycle. So I think it's important to think about that we have these 2 buildings. They are not serving students. And in the case of Lewisboro Elementary School, we do have some revenue to offset the expenses there, but there are some repairs needed to the building that will far outpace the revenue that we're currently generating. So I think we have things to think about, and I would be my preference that as a board, those aren't uniquely our decisions, but that they be decisions that involve the stakeholders who are involved and the community. So I would really like to propose that we create a board committee that could include some composition of people, which we can discuss, and that we create a charge for that committee to evaluate those 2 properties and what might be some good next steps with them. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts about that in terms of composition of the committee. I think what we would try to do tonight is to come to some sort of agreement about whether or not we'd like to create that committee and what we think the charge could be for that committee. And then we'll have it as an actual resolution on the next agenda to a resolution to create the committee and actually specify its charge. So for tonight, I just want to think about if we're open to creating this committee, and a little bit about thinking about the composition of it, how many, and maybe some first draft thinking about the charge. So I will say that as part of our evaluation of a lease, we did have executive session about the building with our finance committee, where they did, advise us that this day might come where the costs of Lewisboro would outpace the revenue that the rent generates. So we've come to that juncture, and I think it would be good to have a conversation with our community about it.
I think it's a good idea. I think we should put a committee together for it.
Okay, do we have any?
Can I just ask?
Yeah,
Do you want to differentiate the two properties at all? Or you're talking about a committee that's going to be discussing both of them?
I think there's probably more to discuss with one property than the other, but for efficiency, I think it could probably be the same committee. And, I think there's less to evaluate.
We have had some conversation on this already, right? So we've had, the finance committee did opine. And the finance committee had members of the community.
Correct.
Added in the finance
Yeah.
committee, and the recommendation, I think, was pretty unanimous. So what would the objective of an additional committee be? To just get more input from the community beyond the input we've already received from the community?
I think the finance committee was looking at it as specifically a financial decision, right? So I don't think they were thinking about, they were just advising us financially in terms of our rents versus our revenues and our property expenses versus the use of the property. So just to be clear, I want to be clear that we are not talking about divesting of either of the properties that these buildings are on. We're really talking about the structures that are on them. So I think
Not divesting of the land.
not divesting of the land, sorry. I mean, I think that we don't have a clear path. Like, so there are multiple options for what could happen with more so Lewisboro than Shady Lane. But there's parts of that building that are newer, parts that are older. There's land that could be used. And I think it's just important to think about it together. I don't want to, I think we could all come up with 10 different things that we think might make the most sense, but we might want a more in-depth report on the property from KG&D or some type of assessment of what the repairs are. I think there's
completely agree with you. I'm just so sometimes, and I'm all for community input.
Yeah.
But sometimes too many cooks in the kitchen is not helpful. And I'm not sure that the best, it feels to me like we're kicking the can a little bit, that we're saying, well, let's bring more people in from the community and ask them what they think. But at the end of the day, it's the board's decision as to what the future state of both buildings will be. And so I know that we've already gotten some community input on it, and I'm not opposed to it. It just feels like we're delaying. We've already, finance committee in question, I think, was 2 years ago.
Mhm.
So we've already delayed 2 years, and now we're going to set up another committee to talk about the same things that, in my opinion, we've already talked about. I was on the finance committee at the time, that's what I know. So for me, I don't know why it's necessary to set up another committee and to invite the community to come in. If we feel like we have all the information we need to make a decision, we should make the decision. If we feel there's more information we should gather that information and then make the decision. I'm not sure what we benefit by having another year around of more conversations. At the end of the day, we have to make a tough decision. And I know, there's going to be some controversy. And
Well, I guess I'm not proposing that it's a one-year committee. I think it would be a committee for a period of time, 3 months, perhaps 4 months. I think that there's options. So we have a building that could be demolished. We have a building that could be partially demolished. We have a property. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could talk about. And I think, there's the costs. We would have to evaluate the costs of what does it cost to move the electric plant and the heat plant if we were to keep a portion where that would, those kind of things.
there's no doubt we need more information.
we need
I just
more
don't know
information.
that getting more opinions is going to necessarily be helpful to get to a decision about what we do with both properties or the property. Although I'm not completely opposed to the idea. I just feel like we did already get input. And to your point, like evaluating the cost, we know the age of certain components of that building and whether, some of them are resurrectable or not. And the answer is most of it is not. So I guess if we can state the objective of the committee and maybe time box it and say, it's going to be a 6 month or a 1 year and not say it's a never ending committee, then I think it probably.
Oh, yeah.
makes
So
sense.
this would be a time box committee for certain. I don't even know that we would need it to be more than 3 months. I think ideally there might be some implications for future budgeting. So I think we have some questions to answer. I think we need to think about what would it look like to the community to not have these buildings? And what is the best way to use the property? I don't know that we, the 7 of us, can make those decisions independently. I think there's probably lots of different ideas. I'd like some input from our administrators on like what's the academic value of a piece of land, right? Like what could you use a piece of land for, gardens or other things that might be useful for us, sustainability options that might be interesting. So I guess I'm not comfortable myself. So this is why I'd like committee thinking through all that just as the board. I think
That's fair.
so, I mean, but I think we want to think about how big of a committee would we want and what is the charge? I mean, so the charge would be, I think, to make a recommendation for the Board of Education to, on how to manage the,
What is the disposition of both properties?
yeah,
Because right now the expenses, that's money that should be
Yeah.
could be
Yeah.
going to our education of our
Correct.
students, especially in a budget year that is not looking so
Rose,
positive as the last few years. And I think it's also important for the community to understand. I think sometimes people lose sight of it, that this isn't property that we can sell to the town. It's property that belongs to the school district that encompasses more people than just the town of Lewisboro, because you often hear, well, the town should just buy the property. So I think it's important for us to remember that we may need this property down the road. Hopefully our numbers are going to turn around. We were 1,000 students up a couple of 10, 15 years ago. So I think it's important for the community to understand that we're not disposing of the land, that it's a valuable asset to us, but it's costing us money as is.
so
I'm
thoughts on the
thinking,
charge?
yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking about the charge. That I think a recommendation to the board on a financially, maybe it's not just one option, sort of a community generated several options of a financially feasible use of the properties that retain ownership for the school district, right? Because I think we talked about this, like right now, Julie has thrown out several ideas of what we could do with the properties, but we might get more ideas from the community, and then sort of some people thinking about it outside of us in this public discussion might yield different results.
Can you read what you said?
Oh,
What-
I didn't write it down.
Oh,
Sorry. I just,
thought you were-
I was just saying,
Yeah. So a recommendation to the board.
I mean, I
regarding-
think it's one thing. Do you want them, they have to have one recommendation or a couple
Proposal.
proposals, 3 different visions of what, maybe up to 3, 1 to 3.
I'm really struggling with this though. I mean, this is pretty much what the finance committee did. We
Well, I
went
feel
through,
like the
we
finance
provided
committee-
3 options, right? For
Well,
each
you
of
provided
those
3, the
buildings.
finance committee provided 3 options for one, addressing one property that we owned. And it was not, I think, as Julia said, it was a financial analysis only that didn't really think about also community value of like what the properties both mean to the community, but also that, I mean, Lewisboro Elementary School is used by the town of Lewisboro and also by our Country Children's Center, which provides preschool and after-school childcare. So there is a community value that is, and also the gym's used for many, many activities, right? So there is a value to the community, and that needs to also be taken into account, I think, when we're thinking about these properties and how they're used. And so incorporating that voice and those perspectives, I think, will help us come up with something that is comprehensive, that also, I think what we know already is the financial analysis, and that needs to go into the recommendations, but not be the only driver, though a very important one.
So then the charge, I guess I'm would like a recommendation
want a
personally. I don't know. And,
I
but
like to
I'm
think
open to
expansively.
saying, we want to be presented with options. I don't know how people, one recommendation. up to a certain number of
I'd
recommendations.
like to see the analysis, to be honest with you. I think it's the board's decision ultimately, and I'd like
Right.
to see the analysis. Like, why, what are all the things on the table, and why might you recommend one or more?
Right, so maybe, so we'd like to see like sort of the criteria, so we're gonna charge this committee to evaluate the use of the property with a criteria that helps us understand their recommendation. With a description of the criteria they use to make the recommendation, something like that. I mean, we can.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'll draft something in terms of as a charge. I think the goal would be that we would announce this committee have there's a resolution in the next committee meeting. Andrew, I would like to have some employees involved.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you want to think about who
Yep.
those would be. We might want to have those in the description.
Mhm.
And then we could pick a number, an ideal number for the full committee, just so we can actually get some work done, and that might depend on how many administrators you think should be a part of that. But, I think 12 to 15 is probably the cap of what we would want. So if
Yeah.
you think there's a certain number
Mhm.
of district employees who should be on that and a certain number of board members, that would leave us a certain number of community member options.
Did we identify, I don't know if we have, but
Yeah.
Staff members who are also who also live in the district? Serve both roles, or is that not
We can think about that.
well, can you help me understand why we need administrators or staff members on the committee?
Because I think that there's a educational evaluation of like, when we make a recommendation, let's say the recommendation is to divest of a building and come up with a budget to create something on that property that would serve students. We'd want to
Like
evaluate
fields.
that. What would the cost be of that? Do you know, like, I guess I'm saying like, I'd like to see not just like, we've heard from our finance committee, their recommendation that the buildings from a financial perspective are a drain on the district, right? So we know that. And I guess I'm trying to get some guidance on creating a vision for what those properties would be used for. And so I think in particular, some of our staff in Meadow Pond in terms of Shady Lane and what would be the best use of that land. I think that would be great to have an administrator from that building or a teacher from that building who would say, oh, we would really like this, because I think we need to understand what the future and what the future use might be. I think also helps me to feel better about sort of the path of the decision. All right, so I will work on in the planning meeting with Alana and Andrew, the charge to write the actual charge. And then we'll put a committee, a creation. So it's a board committee, right?
Mhm.
Right, because it's not your committee. So it's a board
Yeah.
committee and we can think about, I would say, if we can have our first meeting be somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, April, that maybe it would be through the end of the school year or something like that. April, May, June, that's kind of quick. I don't know, yeah, but
Why wait till April? Could we not set it up sooner than that?
so our next board meeting is February 8th. And we would want to invite the,
having budget.
so March, yeah, March. But I'm also, we have. So, yeah, okay. I mean, then March, we give us March, April, May, June. Ish.
With the understanding that they could wrap up, it may be a quick decision, right?
Hmm.
You never know
Have you
who's
been
on
on a
there.
committee?
I know. There's hope, there's hopefulness, but it could be there could be
Okay.
limited things that we could do.
Right, well, correct. Okay. All right,
Just another totally different approach would be if we wanted to do like a 1 day sort of get people together and just ideate, a quicker process. I'm sure we'd be in favor of that, you know, just.
Oh, and then let the board. Okay, so I mean, I'm
Maybe we
proposing
can,
committee. Maybe a committee is not the best strategy. I mean,
I don't know,
that's
it's just
another
just a
approach.
different approach of like, if we really want.
Like a learning cafe, that could be, you could get a lot of different ideas.
I mean, it's just.
I think you need a committee to actually think through how to do this, right? So that committee might say, we'd like to have two opportunities for community members to come in and, do some of those exercises where you put little stickies on posters or whatever it might be. And then we're going to take that information. We're going to ask for some information from our business office. We're going to ask for some information from the engineers,
Facilities.
and we're going to make a recommendation. All right. Okay. I think I have enough. Thank you for this discussion. I appreciate it,
Thank you.
and see what happens next.
Julia,
Yeah.
I just want to say, it may sound like I'm being negative, and I'm not at all. It's high time that we made a decision on both of these properties. And I'm kind of maybe chomping at the bit a little bit to say, like, what are we doing? But we're about to have to spend a lot of money, in particular on one of those two buildings, and we need to fix it. So I really applaud the dialogue and the discussion. I'm just nervous that heading into a committee like this might start to generate a lot of controversy, and that it may slow the whole process down rather than speeding it up, which is our objective. So I just hope that whatever we choose, that people will bring their best selves to those meetings, and let's sort of drive it forward. It really doesn't matter where we end up. And I appreciate community interest, but at the end of the day, there's a big financial decision to be made here as well. So
Agreed.
we just, and that's where my trepidation is coming from.
I would like us to have a decision as well. So I'm with you. Okay, so we move on to 8.01, which is an opportunity for public comment. My computer closed the window. So I'll give this part. I just wanted to see if anyone has anyone signed up to speak during public comment? Okay, great. Thank you. So now we can move on to item 9.01. And I'm gonna start with I need to pull out item 10.08, which is an appeal to the Board of Education. And I'd like to make a motion that we deny the appeal. We need to vote on that separately. And then I want to talk about item 12.05 of the consent agenda that I don't want to pull out, but I do want to talk about. So if we can start with a vote on item 10.08, which would be for the board to deny the appeal that's in that item. So if we can vote on that, I guess there's not. So there's a motion and a second on that. I apologize. Okay, so I need a motion to deny the appeal. Motion is by Lorraine, seconded by Ilana. All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? All those abstaining? Bill is abstaining. So it's 5-0 with 1 abstention. And then on the consent agenda, we do have item 12.05.
Can I quickly pull out just to discuss
yeah.
12.04 for a moment?
Sure.
So in item 12.04, I'm recommending to the board tonight that the Lisa Hurley, who was appointed in July as our interim assistant superintendent for business, tonight we're recommending that the interim word be removed and she be appointed as our assistant superintendent for business. Lisa's been doing a phenomenal job through 6 months. We're lucky to have her. Outstanding business officials are in short supply. Lisa has been with the district a number of years. She was previously tenured as our school business administrator. She did a great job through that role. We're lucky to have her here, and I'm very happy to make this recommendation to the board tonight. Thank you for considering it.
Thank you. Thank you for pulling that out. And then I'm going to pull out item 12.05, which, as we know, Andrew announced to the community that he will be retiring from the district on July 12th. And I've been very happy through my entire tenure as a board member in the district to be able to work with Andrew. I'm going to get emotional, sorry. Andrew went to the district during a time when we had been in pretty severe turmoil. There was a lot of controversy around the district and dissatisfied families and teachers. And he came into the district with an approach of really listening and creating open dialogue and being an excellent communicator. Those were some of the things that we initially really hoped he would bring. And he is an excellent communicator and a very ethical and thoughtful person. And that has immensely helped our district to move forward in a way that has been collaborative. We've heard from teachers over the years just how valued they feel when they present to us about the innovation cohorts, which are one of the things that were new in the district. They talk about really feeling supported by the district. I was reading the original announcement when Andrew was hired, and Andrew said he was going to be the learner in chief. And I think he has presented himself always as a person who's looking to learn and to evolve. And he's created that climate for both our students and for our teachers and our administrators. And we're really grateful for the impact that you have had on our district. We will have opportunities to specifically name all of the different accomplishments. But I want to thank you as a parent and as a board member for really helping us to become a better district, for supporting our students every day, and for creating a culture among our teachers and administrators to value our students and what they need as the most important thing. And I've been in buildings with Andrew where our elementary school students know who he is. And I think about my experience in school, and I don't even think I ever saw the superintendent. And so your presence in the district and your availability to our students and our families and our teachers makes us a better district. So thank you very much. And I'm really happy for you because it's an incredibly demanding thing to be a school superintendent, and especially with the level of commitment that you've made to it. So I know you will continue to be a really significantly positive impact on education, and I look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thank you, Julia, very much.
And with that,
Well, may I just make a
yes,
comment
please.
too? And I don't know if anybody else is waiting to also just say something. And I think I really appreciate your words. You said that so beautifully. And partly what I want to do is also just respond to how you're feeling and provide a note of hopefulness, if I might, which is to say that I found it a little hard not to be reminded of the night that Andrew was appointed. And I so appreciate that you went back and looked at that too. It was a great moment of hopefulness for our school district. And we had gotten to know you through an interview process that you characterized as quite rigorous, and fully expect that we'll continue to do any future searches in a quite rigorous manner. And we highlighted at that time for our community your thoughtful understanding of educational issues facing public schools, and in particular, the issues facing Katona-Lewisboro at the time, your commitment to good teaching and learning, as Julia has already noted, and your ability to inspire and develop leadership in others, as we see and have just experienced by your very words tonight. And thank you for that, because we're going to need it. And in your own words that night, you shared with our community that although you did have much to learn, you had already come to learn that Katona-Lewisboro is a school district with terrific students, teachers, staff, and tremendous parent and community support. All true, still true. And you commented that you were eager to build on those strengths and make our schools function at an even higher level. And so from my perspective, and the note of hopefulness is that the good news for Katona-Lewisboro is that we are functioning at a higher level thanks to your efforts, your tenure in the district, your tireless dedication to students and staff, as Julia noted, and you strengthened our school district's culture and created an environment where, in the words of one of our veteran teachers who said this several years after you had been in the district and upon your having hired another very talented administrator whom you attracted to the district, quote, "We are able to focus on having the right conversations about our students. And we will continue to have the right conversations about our students thanks to your legacy, which is a strengthened Katona-Lewisboro School District. And this continues to be a cause for hopefulness tonight, even as we are about to respectfully accept your resignation." Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have to accept the resignation?
I remember when I joined Marjorie, you said that Andrew is a leader among leaders, and I hadn't heard that thing that you were the learner in chief, and I was thinking today about how you are so committed. You designed and have continued to push forward the learning commitment, and I really admire the continuous learning that you have shown as a leader, and the leadership that the way that you inspire other leaders and encourage other leaders and listen as a leadership skill. And I also think that leaving when things are good is also an amazing leadership skill. So thank you for leaving us at a good moment. And we also wish you the best of luck and look forward to celebrating you at a future time.
Thank you very much.
Andrew, I'll just say congratulations to you.
Thank you.
You've had a wonderful career at KLSD, and we've all benefited from your leadership, as we're hearing. I personally have also benefited from your mentorship, accidental perhaps, but nevertheless, I find myself emulating you in many ways in my life. I often think about what would Andrew do in this situation? How would he communicate it? And I personally have learned an awful lot from you. So for that, I'm very, very appreciative for your tenure and your dedication to the district. I'm also appreciative. I wish you all the best. We're going to miss you. It'll be a real tall order to fill your shoes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've brought us through some very difficult times, and you handle those difficult times always with a sense of dignity, pride, thoughtfulness. It's not usually been easy sitting in your position, but you have served us and you have served us well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Does someone want to?
Can I just quickly, I didn't realize that you were all going to say such lovely things. Thank you. I've obviously had some time to reflect, and people have been very kind with their words. And honestly, the thing that I think about the most is how fortunate I've been, truly fortunate throughout my career, to land in places where I'm surrounded by people from whom I could learn and who are just terrific to work with. I've had great models to learn from. I've been very, very lucky in that way. And as a result, was fortunate to land here and have the opportunity to again work with just terrific people throughout the time. And I will always be grateful to this district for the opportunity that the district provided, and for the opportunity to play a small part in obviously a much larger institution that will go on for many, many years and do lots of terrific things. So I thank you all and everyone who preceded you for the dedication and the support. Thank you.
Our pleasure. And with that, would someone like to move the consent agenda? Moved by Lorraine, seconded by Rory. Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
6-0. So we are at item 14.01, which is board dialogue. I don't know if there's anything anyone wanted to discuss during board dialogue. Very good. Okay. We can move on to 15.01, future meetings.
Pardon me, Julia,
Oh, yeah.
before you do, and
Yeah.
I don't want to put China on the spot, so please don't feel that you have to do this, but I did wonder, we've had 2 opportunities to congratulate China on very prestigious awards. Perhaps not tonight, but perhaps in the future, you'd be willing to share with us a high-level overview of your research. And so don't feel put on the spot tonight, but something to think about for the future. I would love to know more about what you've done, and I think it would be edifying for our school community. So just wanted to put that out there.
Great.
Sure, I would love to share it sometime.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
Thank you.
So thank you for asking that.
Thank you.
So Shauna, you'll let Kim know when you want that on the agenda. That's great. Excellent. So Tuesday night, January 30th, we have, Tuesday morning, we have anticipated executive session scheduled at 8:30 in the district office. And then Wednesday night, we have a finance committee meeting, Wednesday, January 31st. That's at 7 p.m. in the district office. Friday morning, we have a sustainability committee meeting at 8:15 in the district office. That's Friday, February 2nd. The following Thursday is our next Board of Education meeting, Thursday, February 8th. Thursday, February 22nd is the following Board of Education meeting. That Friday, the 23rd, we have a policy committee meeting, and Saturday, the 24th is our all-day budget review. So we'll start the budget on February 22nd. And then obviously, as you all know, Saturday we'll go through the budget line by line and review the entire budget that is open to the public. There's one or two one public comment, it's one or two. One midday public comment period. So if you'd like to come and watch us go through the budget, there is an opportunity for feedback on the budget. And then we'll review the budget multiple times in future months. And then there is an additional finance committee meeting Tuesday, February 27th at 7 p.m. in the district office. That is all. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn? Motion by Bill, seconded by Ilana. All those in favor?
Aye.
6-0. Great. Thank you.